All right. Welcome everybody here in person and in our global audience. I'm Bill Barbieri, the director of the McLean Center for the Study of Culture and Values here at Catholic University, and the instructor for Religion, Ethics, and Ecology, class from which we have some students present today. We continue today our lecture series on moving the needle, interdisciplinary perspectives on motivating ecological change. And we're very privileged today to have a distinguished expert and a very generous colleague who has joined us here at the university as a visiting fellow for March and April, namely Professor Markus Vogt, who holds the chair in Catholic social and Christian social ethics at the Ludwig-Maximilians-Universität in Munich, Germany. He's a not just nationally, but internationally known scholar of environmental ethics. He also works in the field of peace studies. He's published very important books in those fields. His book, Prinzip Nachhaltigkeit, the principle of sustainability, won the award of the Centesimus Annus Foundation in Rome as a distinguished contribution to Christian to Catholic teaching. His magnum opus has been published recently, Christliche Umweltethik, and he's working on an English translation that will be published in the next year or so in the US. And he has on his very extensive CV, numerous English language titles as well. Just a couple would be a book on climate justice that he published through the Rachel Carson Center of the University of Munich. He has another book with some colleagues on religion in the Anthropocene. His topic for today is Safeguarding Creation, the Global Climate Crisis as a Challenge for Theology and Church. We will have Markus give a presentation, and then we will invite in the first round comments and questions from the students in the course that he has so very generously been attending. But we'll open things up to as well to the rest of the audience and to anyone who wants to put questions in the chat from the online audience. And we'll go for a bit over an hour. And then for those of you who are here, there will be some refreshments and nourishment afterwards. So please welcome to the podium, Professor Markus Vogt.
So, dear Bill, dear colleagues, dear students here and also in the virtual room, I welcome also from my side. And first of all, I would like to say thank you for inviting me, for the warm welcome, not only today, but also in the last weeks, for integrating me in this seminar and for the chance to be part of the spirit of the CAU and the academic life, the social life, and also the spiritual life, where I live. Safeguarding creation, the global climate crisis as a challenge for theology and church is my topic. Quite a big topic. You can address it also a little bit easier in just one simple question. What is the specific duty and competence of the Catholic Church in times of climate change? I would like to discuss that with you in 3 steps. Just some remarks.
I'm just going to admit something.
First, the new geological epoch of the Anthropocene. Second, eco-theology. And third, church responsibility in times of climate change. The first approach is ethical, the second theological, and the third practical. I will not discuss all. I will make just some remarks about that 3 steps or questions. First, the empirical and ethical approach. I don't know whether you all know the IPCC. I think so. It's a best known, most important scientific research group about climate change. And it works now more than 30 years. It's the recent report 2022 in autumn published, pointed out three main headlines. First, 3.6 billion people are at risk from climate change. That's nearly half of mankind, especially that part of mankind who is directly dependent on agriculture. The second, the change, that's wrong written. The non-acting is a criminal neglect of responsibility. Sorry, it's wrong written. Non-acting is a criminal act of neglect of responsibility, and IPCC addresses that to the international community. He says the international community has a strong duty to act soon for transformation for some sustainable economy, world economy. And the third headline I would share with you, the window of opportunity for effective climate protection and adaptation is still open. So we have good technological possibilities to act. It's not too expensive. It's more expensive if we act not now, but later on. So it's a question of rationality. It's a question of the ability for global solidarity. A report, so the situation is not hopeless, but on risk. All measurable data and facts, as well as scientific assessments of the impacts of the use and consumption of our livelihood, signal that we are heading towards an uninhabitable Earth. But it's not fate. We have to decide what we will do.
Sorry. Just click that.
Next. No. Okay. The most important term to summarize the situation is the term Anthropocene. In the class we discussed last meeting about that. A change in the dynamics of Earth systems. Anthropocene means that humankind contains a geological factor. It means that the situation we had in the Holocene, the last 12,000 years, has gone, and we have now another dynamics of the Earth system, and that's due our civilization. And that means that the only state of the Earth system which we know, in which civilization could grow up, is ended, and we have to shape the new Earth system. It's a big burden of responsibility. In Munich, we had in the Deutschen Museum a big exposition, Welcome in the Anthropocene. But in origin, the theory of Anthropocene is more a catastrophic theory. But that changed a little bit in the public awareness about that term. There is a high pressure to act, but at the same time, also reason to think more fundamentally about the future of mankind and our model of society. That's what I'm doing. I think the high pressure to act, but it's so fundamental that it's also a starting point to think in another way, what is our role in the history of the Earth system and in the nature. Struggle for Gaia is the most, especially in Germany and in Europe, the most discussed book about that situation of the Anthropocene from Bruno Latour. He says, struggle for Gaia is that what will shape the situation in the 21st century. The main conflicts will shape about that. struggle for Gaia. It's settling down in the ruins of modernity. So, now I like the book from Eva Horn. She is professor for literature in Wien at the university. She wrote a very interesting book about the Anthropocene and what is the meaning and the consequence of this situation for our self-understanding. Thinking in the Anthropocene aims at thinking human life forms and non-human being in a common context. According to Eva Horn, the concept of the Anthropocene is about nothing more and nothing less than another way of being in the world. It's important to understand the human being no longer as crown of creation, but as participant of networks. We call that in the advisory board for the German government about environmental question of the German government, Retinität, from the Latin term rete, the network. To be able to think in networks and not in linear causality models is the center of a new kind of environmental ethic which we need. Let me finish that first short view about the empirical and ethical question of safeguarding creation with idea of the three possible approaches to argue. There are three possible arguments. The first argument is Latin prudentia. It includes rational choice and also wisdom. The second argument is Glück, happiness. And the third argument is justice. That are the three possibilities to argue for safeguarding creation. First, Klugheit, prudentia.
Prudence.
Prudence, yes, prudence. It's a question of prudence, not to destroy the habitat where we are living in, not to destroy the nature from which we are dependent. It's rational choice. That's the most important argument in the sphere of politics. It's an anthropocentric way of argument, but it's a very strong argument. The second way is happiness. It's a part of good life, of happiness, to have a new relationship to the nature. And that's an important argument because it's also connected with emotional aspects and with aspects of identity. For example, the aesthetic of landscapes is very important for identity, national identity, local identity, and also part of good life. That's an argument Pope Francis makes very strong. It's connected with the idea of bon vivere in Latin American tradition. And the third argument is justice. It's a duty of intergenerational and global justice to protect nature. And it's a moral argument, but it's also very important because it's our the rational or the argument of prudence sometimes is not enough because there are winners and losers. And so we have also to understand environmental protection as an argument of justice. I am convinced that we need all three approaches for a strong idea of environmental protection and environmental ethics. Let me come to the second part, eco-theology in the Anthropocene. The relationship with nature as locus theologicus of a question of God today. Which kind of arguments are theological arguments? I think they do not start where rational or ethical or empirical arguments stop, but it's another level of approach. It's more about our idea of meaning, our idea of our image of our role in nature and in history. So it's something like a framework for rationality. It's a kind of storytelling, which is not that what starts there where rationality stops, but it's a framing about from our worldviews, which is very important for new ideas of responsibility. And I'm convinced that the climate crisis and the Anthropocene are starting points of new images of our role in nature and our self-understanding, our worldviews. And that's a question of religion. So ecological crisis or climate crisis is, I call it, religion producing. It's a new framework how to ask about the relevance of God, the relevance of our image of future, of meaning in our time. So religion without that is not part of the dialogue in our time. John Taylor, I think you know his book. Sorry, I have only in the computer the German translation.
Dark green religion.
Dark green religion. Yes, it was not free in the internet. So English version. So I took the German, but it's discussed also in Germany. Dark green religion. And that's his idea, that the worship of nature is a new kind of religion in our time. And he says a very strong kind of religion, of belief. Many have the subordination under nature is that what many people believe or think what is giving of meaning, what is the greater than the nature as the greater entity which gives us meaning, which we recognize that we are part of. That is for many people the starting point to search for a religious identity. He says, but he says it's quite ambivalent, because that new kind of religion is sometimes also a little bit pagan. It's ambivalent because if we see the nature as the last entity, as absolute, we are not ready for compromises. That fits not to our technological society, civilization. And so he says it's sometimes a starting point for readiness for violent resistance. And especially from the Christian view, it sometimes needs also a critical review. And for that critical review, I think there is a difference which Hanika points out is very helpful. Hanika says, here's what I would argue. The ecological crisis represents a revelation. If you don't see it as a revelation, you don't see it deeply enough and seriously enough. It is not a question of making a religion out of ecology, but religion becomes ecological. This difference is important. So ecology is a topos of speaking of God. And so the religion has to become ecological, has to realize that the framework of ecological crisis is now a very crucial place or starting point to speak about hope. What does it mean in times of climate change? Climate change to be of justice in our days. So it means the ecological crisis is a sign of the time. That means it's a revelation. God speaks through us through the ecological crisis. And he challenged us to find new answers about the option for the poor, about justice, about our self-understanding in nature. So the hopes and also the griefs of the people of our time are connected with climate change. We have to understand that as a speaking of God to us in our times. We have to discover the crucified Christus in the crucified creation in our time. But he makes a very important difference. He said that it's not a pagan understanding of nature as absolute to make a religion out of ecology, but it's to say, the other way around. So theology has to understand that creation is a topos of speaking of God. It holds that also cosmophany. And there's a comparison he makes in the history, quite interesting. He compares it with the situation in Enlightenment that he calls the anthropophany. That 200 years ago, we discovered the dignity of man as a necessary purpose, place to speak about God. The unconditioned dignity of man is the place of transcendence in our society. And he says, now in the cosmophony, we have to discover the intrinsic value of nature as a starting point to speak about God, and also as a starting point for a new social contract, a new shaping of society. The main consequence of this approach, in my thinking, is ecological humanism as a systematic base of Christian environmental ethics in the Anthropocene. Not all colleagues agree with me with that concept. Many say we need a post-humanistic approach. But I think from the biblical point of view, the special position of man as image of God and as a moral subject, this cannot be abandoned. That's also the fundament of our democracy. It's very important. Though I think we have to connect the humanistic tradition with the ecological tradition. At the same time, we have to avoid, as Pope Francis calls it, a despotic anthropocentrism. And I think it would be interesting here at the CAU to discuss that with the Institute for Human Ecology. What is the difference of the anthropocentric understanding of human ecology, which dominates the last 30 years of the Catholic social teaching, and the concept of ecological humanism or ecological embedded humanism, which I suppose. Just one important point of that idea of ecotheology, the secularization of Christian hope as optimism for everlasting progress must be questioned. I think our society is shaped in modernity is shaped very much about the idea of everlasting progress as something what gives meaning for whole society. And I have the thesis that the lack of vital imagination of transcendence is compensated with the idea of an absolute open future and the idea of progress. So it's something as a new religion in the modernity, and we have to criticize that. It's not totally wrong, but it is wrong if we see it as a kind of new religion, as meaning giving, because in the history there are often success and missed misleaded ideas. We need a critical distance to the idea of everlasting progress. And I think the Christian idea of hope is not optimism. It's a threatened or crucified hope, a hope which knows also the failure of man about the catastrophes and sufferings of guilt. It has to integrate the critical anthropology of the first 9 chapters of Genesis. And it's very critical about this understanding of man. It is about critical confidence as an alternative to the promise of meaning in the gross dark. And one main idea to set against that idea of everlasting progress is sufficiency or frugality as a substantial part of the Christian understanding of the quality of life. I think very interesting what Pope Francis said about that, criticizing the idea of everlasting progress. He says what we need is a cultural revolution. And he says the main task of education in university and in schools for Christian education is a new idea, a cultural revolution about the idea of progress and development, integrating the dimension of ecology or creation, safeguarding creation. And he wrote that not only in the encyclical Laudato Si, but also in the introduction about Spluritatis Gaudium,
Evangelii Gaudium?
The writing about the education. Voto proprio, Splendor Veritatis.
Yeah.
Splendor Veritatis, it's called. So it's also a rule for a new idea of the duty of Catholic education. To build up leaderships for a cultural revolution regarding our understanding of development. The competence of the churches is not to be understood as supreme moral agency, so Hans Jonas calls it, but in the sense of morality beyond moralizing. So Karl Rahner is for me one of the most important theologians in the 20th century. And that's the specific competence. We have not a lack of morality in the ecological debate. We have sometimes too heavy moral appeals. So what we need is another storytelling, a storytelling which is attractive and it's a new imagine of our role, of our self-understanding. And that framework that enables for a new kind of morality, but it's not just the first imperative, it's first an idea of what we are. It's an ontology, what we need. This anchors eco-social responsibility for the future in narratives of self-understanding of man and his work. William Barbieri wrote a very interesting essay about ethics and the narrative life. Let me point out as last thought in that second part, spirituality as a base of an ecological lifestyle. It's interesting how Pope Francis shapes the idea of spirituality in Laudato Si. He combines different approaches, Franciscan spirituality, Jesuit spirituality, the Benedictine spirituality, the spirituality of Latin America, and the spirituality of the Orthodox Church. And that's a very strong and very interesting mixture. From Franciscan spirituality, he picks up especially the idea of joy, simplicity, and fraternal relationship with fellow creatures. So the idea that simplicity is a very important idea of good life. And Martin Heidegger calls it the unexhaustible power of simplicity, as an idea of the quality of life, what we need. And another element of spirituality is Mother Earth and Sister Earth. It's interesting that parallelism of Mother Earth and Sister Earth, which logically not fits very good together, but it's in the Sun Song of Francis from Assisi, which Laudato Si is also borrowed from the Sun Song of Francis from Assisi.
Canticle of the Sun.
Canticle of the Sun. Canticle of the Sun. Oh, sorry. Yeah. And also that, and especially, and that parallelism, which is not very logical, but it's interesting. It's not only the mother god and a subordinative relation to nature, but also a brotherhood to nature. And that is also to find in the Latin American tradition. So it's a good thing. But also the term house of the earth is a very strong term in Latin American tradition. And Leonardo Vogt, for example, published 2 books about the house of the earth. And that's the subtitle of the encyclica. So it's clear that Leonardo Vogt is one of the co-authors of the encyclica. That's especially interesting because Leonardo Vogt is a prominent speaker for liberation theology, and there was in earlier times a conflict with the magisterium, with Vatican. In terms of holistic spirituality, the Catholic tradition can learn a lot from orthodoxy. He quotes several times Bartholomeus, and that's a new thing that the Pope quotes someone from another confession. And that Bartholomeus is the head of the Orthodox Church. He made his PhD at our faculty in Munich. Let me come to the third, last, and shortest part of my presentation, the practical approach, church responsibility in the Anthropocene. The German Bishops' Conference published in 2018 10 recommendations for action. That's a very small booklet, but widespread in all parishes in Germany. And I'm a co-author of that scripture, and so I fight it for the ideas there. It's also speaks about practical action in the context of pastoral work, in the context of diocesan administration, and also socio-political commitment. Just some concrete demands. Creation spirituality should be more consciously located in proclamation of liturgy. Church traditions should, such as fasting, should be made fruitful anew with regard to responsibility to creation. Now we have the fasting times. So I think it's attractive and to think about that, how to connect the idea of fasting with ecological ideas. In Germany, we have, for example, the initiative car fasting, 7 weeks without private car, or meat fasting, because we all know that meat is ecological, not very friendly, or the idea of plastic fasting. So that are concrete initiatives to connect the idea of fasting with ecological ideas. Or manage, one demand is manage sustainably in church institution and church land. I think ecological management is quite complex in great institution as the church. So it needs a professional management. And also the land is very important because that might be a special tradition in Germany, but the church owns wide areas of agricultural land. And it's very important for biodiversity to have their clear rules for the protection of nature. Or another idea, make mobility environmentally friendly. Mobility is very controversially debated because we are all dependent on mobility of flights, but we all know we have to change, and that's very difficult to change there. For example, one idea is no flight without CO2 compensation, and no flight in a national flight. Then we have to prefer the train. And another concrete demand is assume social political responsibility for the poor and for creation under threat. So we have to be more aware of the situation of the people in Africa, especially. They suffer most about climate change. And so we need more partnerships, more projects to cooperate with that. Bishop Overbeck said a very good sentence when presenting this short text. He said, we want to let deeds speak. And I think it's quite clear that the success of Christian missionary was not because our theology is so easy understandable. For example, the Trinity theology, but it was successful because we let the deeds of love speak. And we need the same in responsibility of creation. One big consequence of that is the idea of that we need regular reports. The first report, what is going on really in the dioceses, in the parishes, was published in 2022. And all 2 years should be published a new report. And it's especially to make that not for the image, but to be honest and to point out the critical and different points. A special aspect of understanding environmental, the specific Christian duty in the environmental debate is that the German Bishop Conference publish expert text, little booklets about the main challenges like climate justice, energy transformation, biodiversity, the protection of soil and water. And that are booklets we published in the last 25 years, often about 100 pages, but important for the expert debate on a public level, interdisciplinary and connected with the political decisions. The latest was about biodiversity. It's just translated into English and published some weeks ago. You can find it also on the internet page of the German Bishop Conference. The main thesis of that is biodiversity loss and climate change are the two main contemporary crises of equal importance, which can only be solved together. That would be an own topic for a presentation, but I decided not to choose this, but just to make a short remark about that expert text. One more practical project is KIRUM. KIRUM steht für kirchliches Umweltmanagement, ecological management of the church. Eichstätt is a very important player in that project. I was one of the co-founders, but to tell the truth, I hated that project because it was such a lot of work. But now in the last 25 years, which it is ongoing now, more than 1,000 institutions, parishes, dioceses, church congresses, monasteries, academies are part of this. And so it is quite powerful. We are in the church the biggest non-profit organization as part of this process. And the methodological basis is the concept of eco-management audit scheme in Europe. So we took that secular concept and adapted it to the church through integrating spirituality and the special possibilities to act from the parishes or dioceses or academies. So it's quite a good project. I hate it, but I ignore that it is necessary for the credibility of the church. And especially now in the time we have, I think you know, we have a big energy crisis in Germany. And the institutions who are part of that project are quite good prepared in the situation of energy crisis and can save a lot of money. For example, I was responsible in the monastery of Benedict Beuern, and they save every year more than 200,000 euro. So that's quite a big amount. One challenging idea connected with that is the idea of climate neutral, being climate neutral by 2035. The EKD officially accepted that goal. The Catholic side is not so decided. Some dioceses accepted it and said it's very difficult to define how to measure. Some others say it's utopian and we don't promise that. I think both sides are not totally wrong, but that's in the moment one of the most prominent discussions we have in Germany. Let me close my talk with a more spiritual approach. 10 years ago, we launched the ecumenical process Conversation to Life, Shaping Change. So it's an idea, Umkehr zum Leben, conversation to life, that we need an ecological transformation. Ivo spoke about the idea of transformation here in this lecture. He's my assistant. The idea of conversation is linked quite strong to the Bible, the idea of conversation, but now in an ecological context. It's a think tank, a good research movement, and a future lab for the great transformation for a post-fossil society. The idea is quite great. The movement says 500 years ago we had the Reformation with Luther, but that was not ecumenical, but it divided the church. And now the Reformation we need is also comparable, fundamental, but now it's ecumenical. Now the main question is not the question about grace and how to reach a merciful God and to avoid punishment. That's not the main question of our time. They say the main question of our time, what is the justification of our lifestyle in the face of God, in the face of the future generation. What is the justification of our lifestyle is now a crucial question which shapes all different topics in a new way. And that's the idea. Ecology is an opportunity and an obligation for ecumenism. The common house of creation is burning. Only together we can save. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. All right, well, that fits wonderfully into both our lecture series and some of the work that we've been doing in our course that looks at the greening of different religious traditions. And you highlighted some of the connections between Christianity, Catholicism, and other traditions. So we're going to start this session now by soliciting some questions and comments from our class, we want to hear from you first, and then we'll open things up a little bit. Who wants to step up first? Yes.
What's the concept of plastic fasting that you mentioned earlier was really interesting, that kind of stuff. In like somebody who lives in definitely like a consumption heavy country such as like America, where it's so almost plastic products, but just that for someone.
It's a difficult question, yes. I think everybody knows best by himself what is the starting point, what can he change, and what is impossible to change. And so I think we have to do what is possible, and we cannot save the world, and we cannot solve all problems. So I apologize also ethics of compromises. So it's necessary to be realistic and not to try to save the world and to be frustrated at the end. And it's necessary. But I think if we are creative, everybody knows where he can act or she can act.
Justine.
So you mentioned Ava Horn's assertion that thinking about human beings and non-human beings that are living on the earth in a shared context be beneficial for the ecological movement. And then you also mentioned the ecological crisis can be thought of as a revelation in some ways. Do you think that applying that common context to like a Christian revelation would be a possibility?
Yes, I think so. I think it's really, I think it's very helpful to that idea also from Panika. What is a revelation? What are the signs of the time? And I think the signs of the time now in the situation of the Anthropocene, of the climate crisis, it's very clear that we need a new relationship to nature, to animals, to our other creation there. And I think it's not possible to think they absolutely equal to human being, because then our ethical system would be confused. But I think to think in networks, to think that we're part of a network and we are dependent from each other, that is really helpful. And that could be a starting point of a new idea of science, of rationality, which is relevant in all fields: the field of science, the field of ethics, the field of relation to nature, and also the field of a methodological idea of, for example, different disciplines in science. So I think the idea of thinking in networks is really very fundamental, and it's something like a new philosophy which we need, which could be a sign of the time in the 21st century.
Couple more from you guys. Lauren.
I really liked when you were talking about cosmophony as a topos of God. And I liked what you had to say about that crucified Christ is like in crucified nature. And I was just thinking about like as like ecologists and even like other classes that I've taken like on the topic of ecology, I think a lot of time there's a tendency to see the earth as like problems we have to solve or to see it as resources. So like is like our role as Christians to love the earth like as we love Christ? Like is that efficient to the ecological like movement within Christianity to see nature as like something to be loved?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
And I think it's quite crucial to say, sometimes we say Christmas means God became man, yes, or human being.
Yeah.
But the evangelist John says God becomes flesh. And that means he is part of creation. And so the incarnation is not limited just on man or human being, it means that God is present in all creation. And that means we can discover the presence of God in creation. And that means to love it in a deeply way. And I think that's very important, because I think in the ethical approach, I spoke about that, we have not a lack of moral appeals. It's often the problem that we have too heavy morality in the ecological debate. And that's a problem, especially for education. So many say, okay, I hear it 2 times, but I don't want to hear more about that topic. And so the approach of loving creation and have a good, fruitful relationship to other creatures, to animals, and to maybe also to our own body as part of the creation is very important for another emotional mood.
Good. One more from you guys?
May I set a question, pose a question?
Yes, who is there?
Mamuka Dolice.
Oh, Mamuka, okay.
Okay. My voice is heard?
Yes, we hear you. Very good.
Okay. Thank you very much for your very interesting report. There are a lot of problems, a lot of new ideas, interesting and deep insights. My question concerns to your main statement that God speaks with us through the ecological crisis, through the ecological catastrophes. I think that in this case, we should speak, first of all, the crisis in the human mind, because crisis in our consciousness is a primary crisis. If we, I remind you the prophet, biblical prophets, Isaiah prophet. Isaiah speaks about God is angry with the humans because their immoral behavior, because they are established in their mind, but not because of ecological crisis. So to my mind, the crisis in our mind is more important, and it is more fundamental, which evokes the ecological crisis. So we can say that the revelation presents crisis in our mind is just the revelation of God, but not crisis in ecological environment. So it's my opinion, because in my opinion, the disturbance of consciousness anticipates the disturbance in the nature. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your question and your distinction. I think it's important to speak about the crisis in our mind. And as I integrate that into a criteriology of understanding signs of the time. And as I think signs of the time are not just the catastrophes, but signs of the time, as it is addressed in Gaudium et Spes, means also the new thinking in a time as a starting point for new hope, for new society, for new ideas. And it's very important to have not only the catastrophic approach as understanding of God in our time, and that would us lead to a moralization, but also to see where are new ideas which shape our ideas of self-understanding of creation, what are the problems of struggling with hope, and where are movements for new ideas to deal with nature, for new ideas of global intergenerational solidarity. And that's very important to have to integrate that into our ideas of the concept of signs of the time.
Okay, thank you. Signs of the time is an important argument. Signs of the time. Thank you.
Very good. Can we take questions from our other guests here? Bill?
Thank you very much. I enjoyed your presentation. As far as very good. Excellent. I have a question. There was a study released here not too long ago that involved a content analysis of statements in diocesan papers by American Catholic bishops with regard to, they were looking for how frequently the bishops talked about or mentioned Laudato Si and so forth. And this is a report that indicates that in point of fact, very few of the American bishops have made much of an effort, certainly through their diocesan publications, to say anything about Laudato Si, the environment, and so forth. It's not as though none of them did so, but very few of them, if you look at this study, which is quite thorough. That's taken as an expression in part of the fact there has been obviously some tension, conflict within the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops between those considered to be more pro Francis and those who are less so. And I'm just curious or wondering, is that the case with regard to the German episcopacy? Are the bishops, I mean, you talked about this 10-point program that they proposed. Are they pretty much all together on that, or are there also divisions among German bishops over?
There are also divisions among German bishops, and we have a lack of awareness of Laudato Si also in the parishes in Germany. And I think it's very interesting. The people outside of the church are quite often more enthusiastic about Laudato Si than the people inside of the church. That's really quite true of our situation, because many people, also politicians, came to me and said they discovered the text Laudato Si and they are fascinated, and it's for them a new approach to understanding their own acting and new horizon, especially if they lost the relationship to faith and to the church. They discover through Laudato Si the relevance of Catholic faith and Catholic Church. That's really a big chance, and we don't use it enough. And maybe to mention just one project in that situation, I was very busy last years to make an oratorium about Laudato Si, and the performance was in November, to have a communication about Laudato Si, also with other people who are difficulty to reach.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I forgot to mention it in my introduction. Markus is not only a wonderful scholar, but he's musically inclined, and he collaborated with the composer from the Berlin Philharmonic to create an oratorio for which Markus wrote the libretto. And it's called Wir sind Erde. We are Earth. It's dedicated to Pope Francis, and it thematizes different attitudes toward the relationship to nature and how to change it. We are hoping that we can arrange a production of it here in the US as well. But it does lead into a question that I wanted to ask you, because you talked, for example, about, you had your triad of different arguments, different ethical arguments about why people should change their behavior. Prudential arguments about happiness, arguments about justice. It's a separate question, justice for whom, if it's just justice for people or if it's justice for other entities as well. But my question is, beyond arguments about, rational arguments about ethical premises, what other tools do we have at our disposal for trying to promote, encourage, maybe nudge people to behave more responsibly in their interactions with the earth? One possibility would be something like using AI or using algorithms to try to subtly shift people's behavior. You've raised the possibility now that music or that art might somehow reach people, move them, inspire them to rethink their relationship to the earth, to act differently. You've also talked a little bit about narratives, although maybe you could say a little bit more about what kind of narratives you mean and how people might access those narratives. What ways beyond argumentation and rational discourse do we have at our disposal for promoting more,
Yes.
for moving the needle, as our lecture series has?
Thank you for that question. That's very important for me to say what is the specific competence. And I think I like the sentence we had in the scholar. It's all about narratives. They are framing our understanding of ourselves. So literature is very important to understand really the conflicts. And I think the most important part of world literature is the Bible. So the stories about purity, about salvation, about conflicts, about dealing with nature. And I think, for example, Hüttermann wrote a very interesting book. At the beginning was Ecology, called it. And it's a discovery of the ecological dimension of the Old Testament. And for example, Jacob and his the sheep, the story knows everybody. And the background of that is a quite good knowledge about which are white and which are black. So he knows more about biology than, for example, Aristoteles. So he points out that in the Bible is included a higher level of ecological knowledge. And that's very interesting to discover it. That are very interesting stories. For example, another example, the Masada in the time 70 past Christus, they lived in the against the Romans. They lived there more than 3 years, and it was especially a problem of good water management. They had special rules for a very good water management. And water management is very important for in times of war, and that's another example for good storytelling in the Bible. But your question goes further. For me, is music very important, and maybe
so we can consider the atonal music, non-classical music, modern music as a chaotic sounds as some form of ecological crisis.
Yes, yes, it's very
which accompanies the ecological crisis. This atonal music.
Yeah, that's a very crucial question.
Music.
That's my experience. The composer at the first draft made a catastrophic music, and I said, no, that might fit to the, but I don't like to hear it. And I said, it's necessary, if we translate it into music, it's necessary to have a balance between atonal or catastrophic part and harmonies. And I think that's special as a success, a very important point in Laudato Si. Pope Francis speaks not only about ecological disasters, but also about joy and about a good life in harmony with nature. And to have that balance is very existential for a good music, for good literature, and also for education. And I think there could be Laudato Si an example. And in Laudato Si, there are included also many stories from Latin America and rural life that is very important as an example for the change.
We have a couple of comments in the chat. Terry McNichol notes, Dr. Vogt, Yo-Yo Ma immersed himself and his music in USA national parks this past summer. He calls his project Our Common Nature. I don't know if you're aware of that particular project. We have a question from one of our doctoral students, Catherine Yanko. Does Christian ethics really overcome the criticism of anthropocentrism? If so, how? Or does it even need to overcome this criticism? You mentioned early in your talk that we have to get used to not being the crown of creation and to maybe think more in terms of networks. That doesn't sound very appealing as an alternative to being the crown of creation, being a member of a network. What are some good models maybe that Christian ethics can?
I think that's maybe the most discussed question of environmental ethics in the last 50 years. Because with Lynn-White, it started the discussion, and then Karl Amari said the anthropocentrism or the is the cultural model of destroying nature. So it's very a very controversial debate, and I say. And some colleagues say we need to abolish anthropocentrism, and I think we need a differentiation. What is very crucial is the humanistic approach, the idea of human dignity. It's a fundament of our society. But I think the idea of being a moral subject includes the idea to acknowledge the intrinsic value of other beings, also of the nature. If we are not moral subjects, we would not be responsible. And ecology is speaking about the idea of responsibility. And as a fundament of that, we need the idea of human being as imago Dei, as a moral subject with the dignity. And but we have to yes, to shape this idea also think further in ecological contexts. And another term instead of anthropocentrism is to speak about anthroporelationalität, also to speak about relationships. And I think for the Christian theology, the thinking in relations is very crucial, starting with the Trinity. Trinitarian theology, and maybe the idea of a center and a periphery is misleading, and so we could abolish that idea of a center and of a periphery, but we should not abolish the idea of human dignity.
Adrian?
What do you mean by spiritual creativity, and what would be the architectural guidelines? And on the flip side of that, considering family, marriage, and values, would you recommend fasting from generating population?
Oh, yeah. I think that's a very important question. I think, yes, especially in Africa, where we have in average the moment 5.1 children for every woman. And it's really an ecological problem. And so we need fasting from overpopulation, and that's. But I think the main problem which we have is not the overpopulation of the earth, but the main problem is our lifestyle, and that's important to say. And on the other and. It's also, as a second step, very important to say to have children is a very private and very crucial question. And it's not a decision of the government. And it should be regulated under the condition of freedom. And there is the practice of the Catholic Church, I think, much better than the theoretical teaching in the Catholic social teaching, because in the practical movement, the missionaries and for example, in South Africa, Latin America, they are quite good aware of the crucial point that education for women, social security for the old people, and education and knowledge about sexuality is very important. So the practical engagement of the church is much better than the theoretical teaching.
And what is spiritual creativity?
Spiritual creativity, I think that's another topic. Yes.
But I saw that in your post.
Yes. But spiritual creativity is, I think, we have often situations of a dilemma, and there we have no simple solution. and there we need creativity to have new ideas. And I think creativity is an important part of human dignity. We are not only, we do obliged to obey, but culture means to have creativity. And we mean creativity in the field of renewable energies, in the field of new ideas of culture in the context of ecological crisis, new ideas how to manage solidarity in a critical situation. And so creativity and the understanding of man as core creative with God. That's part of the understanding of the dignity of man and as image of God.
Good. Yes. I'll take a couple more questions, and I have a comment or two from the chat.
Mine is more a comment than a question. I'm trying to put this together, but it seems the co-creativity is equally a part of spiritual creativity and of the dignity of man, because man is capable of, there's certain virtues of man. I'm a student of Thomas Aquinas and at the Dominican house, and he talks a lot about specific virtues relating to prudence, because prudence was a huge part of the talk, and he talks about two virtues specifically dealing with these different problems. One of them is he uses Greek words for them, synesis and gnome, but effectively the first is applying like the regular law in ordinary circumstances when we're just trying to figure out what our day-to-day actions should be. And that would seem to be a creativity on one level, because prudence is a creative virtue and always ends in action. There's always an action that comes from prudence. And at the same time, like the spiritual creativity, when you're dealing with a difficult problem, Aquinas says usually the recourse is had to higher principles. So you look for the higher principles of the dignity of man, of the mercy of God, of the need for care for creation, but in a bigger sense, like the larger level principles. And then a person like those people who have this virtue are able to, or who practice this virtue of the gnome, the higher level thinking, are able to resolve dilemmas where on a basic level you wouldn't be able to just tell, like this is not a normal situation that we can just cover with the regular laws.
I think that's a very important point. The tragedy of the reception of Thomas Aquinas is that we lost quite often that aspect of creativity. In the thinking of Thomas Aquinas, with his principles, there is a lot of room for freedom, for creativity, especially in his understanding of human nature. And in the reception in the 19th century, in the natural law, we forget that aspect. Assuming the idea of nature absolutely clear, and reducing the idea of the rationality just as obeying to a fixed nature. And I think a rediscovery of the dimension of liberty, of creativity in the image of man and rationality, Thomas Aquinas, is very important, a very important background also for understanding natural law in the ecological context.
Let me just read a couple of comments from the chat. Patricia Nguena writes, spirituality from an African perspective allows us to be interconnected with creation and our relations and notions towards the creator and creation. The human-induced climate change is perpetrated by the industrialized nations who, driven by avarice and disregard of biodiversity and earth replenishing, which is a dire crisis to the African people who has relations with God as the creator and all of creation. She had commented as well that that Christian anthropocentrism is a major concern in ecological sensitivity because of misconceptions of the text in the Genesis narratives. And one of our instructors wrote, the challenge of anthropocentrism is the biggest issue I have found from non-Christian students in accepting any wisdom of the Christian tradition on the environmental questions. So just some comments really from the chat. I want to invite all of the students here before you leave to go down the hallway through the double doors, and there's some pizza available if you want to grab some to refresh yourselves. I want to furthermore announce that we will have a couple of additional events in this series. Starting next Tuesday, the 28th, we will have a discussion of nuclear ethics that will include some reflection on the ecological ramifications of nuclear deterrence and nuclear weapons policy. And then on April 11th, both of those upcoming meetings are in this time slot as well. So at 11 o'clock, from 11 to 12:30. On April 11th, we will have another discussion on narratives and the role of narratives in promoting environmental education. So look for notices about those talks. And please join me once more in thanking Professor Vogt for his perspective. Thank you all for joining us as well virtually, and we'll hope to see you next time.
Thank you.